Crystalline lifeforms, are they even possible? Sporadically featured in science fiction, they present a radically different way for a potential alien creature to exist. Living beings based on precious gems seems like a contradiction, since crystalline structures are antithetical to what we know and understand about life. They are usually imagined either as static structures or mobile beings that superficially resemble biological creatures but with hard, faceted exteriors. But there are also alternative ways of imagining a gem being. Let's go through several options and wonder if, out of the trillions of worlds out there, crystalline or gem-based beings may truly exist on some of them. And if they do exist, how did they develop in the first place? Let's try to find out. In principle, crystals are completely opposite to life as we know it. Organic life is dynamic, depending on molecules and ions moving around in order to interact. Being mainly based on carbohydrates, it depends on relative chaos in order to function. Molecules or ions have to be dissolved or suspended in water in order to be able to do stuff. Crystals, on the other hand, are highly ordered arrangements of often very limited sets of minerals. Nevertheless, systems that are fundamentally static and ordered could still become imbued with life, or at least do similar things to organic living creatures. These are in fact very familiar to us because we produce and build them all the time. Machines and computers, and their intersection, which we know as robots. Now, most robots are chiefly made of metal parts, which are crystalline on the atomic scale, and the same could be said of the silicon that constitutes their brains, so to speak. And even though this is generally not what we think about when imagining a crystalline being, metallic robots still illustrate the general principle of composing something akin to a biological life form built out of static structures instead. Yet, as ingenious works of human engineering, it's hard to imagine how robotic life forms may have come about as a result of natural evolution. Crystals, on the other hand, can grow and interact with their environment, and even encode and funnel information, in theory. Interestingly, clay minerals are even thought to have played a key role in Earth abiogenesis by providing a lattice for polymers like RNA and proteins to bind to and assemble themselves. So in a certain way, some form of information was embedded already in the mineral lattice itself. If you imagine a situation where minerals remain the main component for further evolution, you have already arrived at a plausible scenario for crystalline structures becoming alive. Science fiction has in any case conjured up several intriguing propositions, like in the Star Trek franchise, for instance. In the original series episode, The Devil in the Dark, a silicon-based life form was introduced called the Horta. It went undetected at first because it did not register as life, leading to conflict with the human settlers there. Though not crystalline per se, but rather made of fibrous asbestos, it burrowed through and lived off rock using extremely corrosive acids. This concept of a sentient mineral-based life form being overlooked was revisited in Star Trek The Next Generation in the episode Home Soil. Not recognized as alive, crystalline life embedded in the soil took control of a terraforming station's equipment and started attacking humans. When contact was finally established, they famously referred to humans as ugly sacks of mostly water.
Giant sacks of mostly water.
In another episode of the same series, a hostile crystalline entity was introduced as a large structure able to somehow propel itself through space, feeding off the life energy of living beings. Then there are the Tholians, who probably fit best with what most of us imagine when thinking of crystalline life forms with their colorful facets and sharp edges. Tholians are functionally comparable to humans in the sense that they can walk around and manipulate their environment using an assortment of limbs. Now, this would seem incompatible with the normal rigidity of crystalline structures. But for as far as is revealed in the franchise, the crystalline facets are actually a kind of exoskeleton. And in order to achieve mobility, the exoskeleton must be jointed and is therefore not continuous. Under the hard crystal facets, certain unknown fluids can be seen moving around, presumably to perform several functions. Perhaps instead of using muscles, the Tholians use hydraulics to move their limbs? It has also been suggested that Tholians are principally silicon-based life forms, meaning that there may be polymeric compounds involved as well. In Andy Weir's project Hail Mary, the alien Rocky, a so-called Eridian, is another example of such a quasi-crystalline life form. Most of its mass consists of a siliceous carapace with jointed limbs, while the tiny organic portion is water-based. All in all, these are not purely crystalline creatures, but rather composite, and in that sense, these are much more like the mechanical robots mentioned earlier. If evolved naturally, it's conceivable that these life forms started out with a more flexible and perhaps silicon-based framework, growing hardened crystalline shells as a form of outer protection. Silicon polymers would require conditions without water and oxygen to remain stable and much higher temperatures to give some extra flexibility. In that respect, the Tholian profile fits the bill. I could perhaps explore this further in a dedicated video on the possibility of silicon-based life. But could we conceive of a being that is principally crystalline, so no flexible parts, yet still able to kinetically interact with its environment in human-level timescales, like the Tholians and Eridians? And unlike the latter examples, could such a being thrive under Earth-like conditions on land? An interesting suggestion for this actually comes from a surprising place. In the Steven Universe cartoon, gems are alien beings from a planet referred to as Gem Homeworld. They are inspired by actual mineral gems that give each individual their respective names, characteristics and abilities. The bodies of these gem beings are projections emanating from a physical gem that is said to contain their life force. But unlike holograms, the gems' bodies are tangible and have mass, allowing them to interact with the world around them. The physical gems themselves are embedded in specific visible spots on the generated body. So the physical manifestations of gem beings are not at all like mechanical robots, but something much smarter and more flexible than pure matter. Their bodies are said to be made of light, but therein also lies the challenge. On first thought, it seems to make sense since crystals can be transparent, so light can easily move and be guided in intricate ways through the core crystal outwards. However, the problem is that light is very different from matter. It does not behave like a solid or even a fluid. It never stays in the same place, moving at the speed of light, naturally. Properties that make matter tangible, like mass and charge, and what enables it to form stable structures, are completely absent from light. So how could the bodies of gem beings be made of light, summoned at will from its core gem? Well, despite all its macroscopic effects, all matter is in principle still made from subatomic particles, just like light is from photons. These particles bounce around in infinitesimally small structures called atoms. But atoms actually are mostly empty space themselves. Their kinetic properties are ultimately governed by electromagnetic and other forces. So in reality, it's not all that far removed from light as a form of electromagnetism as it may seem. Human technology is already capable of creating photonic crystals for manipulating light flow. Any sufficiently sophisticated, semi-transparent mineral lattice could have capabilities of accruing and emitting light, as well as generating electromagnetic fields to interact with its environment. And this may be central to how gem beings would operate. The crystal gem is the main computer and generator, complete with power source. The body would be a holographic projection of some sort of hard light that behaves like matter. Damage to the gem core itself could lead to permanent harm, thus corrupting it. Any damage to the projected body would be temporary and can be reformed from the gem core. These bodies can be popped under severe stress, like we see in the show, implying that it's a hollow structure held together by a membrane, or gembrane if you will. And gems have the ability to combine with other gems in what is called a fusion. This creates a wholly new individual with greater abilities. If such a structure is even at all possible, what are the options for creating a tangible projection of light with kinetic properties without delving too deep into sci-fi magic and technobabble? The most easily conceivable is the generation of electromagnetic fields, like magnetism, of which we readily can feel the kinetic effects in our everyday lives.
I mean, the sensation is that there's something there when you push these two magnets together.
But you're not at all disturbed by the fact that when you put your hand on the chair, it pushes you back. But it's the same electrical repulsions.
Now, magnetic forces are limited in that sense to other magnetized or otherwise charged objects. But sheer light is still capable of exerting some force on material objects. We already use optical tweezers to suspend objects as big as biological cells into place. However, these tools merely nudge existing matter and can't conjure up a solid form out of thin air. To create a body that feels heavy and resists impact, the light itself would need to acquire the structural integrity of matter. Without going too much into the details, we could envision a gem being's body as a complex, standing light wave projected from their core gem and manipulated at will. That still doesn't quite solve the problem of making this projection tangible. However, recent advancements in physics and engineering hint at some intriguing possibilities. One way to give photons the properties of matter is to bind them to quasi-particles known as excitons, which borrow effective mass from the electrons and crystal lattice they're derived from. The resulting hybrid particles are called polaritons. A large enough amount of polaritons could then form a so-called Bose-Einstein condensate and, under the right conditions, a so-called supersolid, a rare state of matter with unusual properties. However, these only occur microscopically under very tightly controlled conditions in a vacuum and would quickly fall apart in normal atmospheric conditions and on the scales that we need. Also, despite the somewhat misleading name, the supersolid would just be a quantum fluid and not actually a tangible object. So we may need to rely on more speculative, undiscovered physics after all for explaining gem beings. And all these explanations rely heavily on technology, implying that gem beings were created in a lab. Could there be a path for a gem being or any crystalline creature to have evolved naturally? Crystals themselves are already naturally occurring as they form in the ground. One way to perceive of these structures to be imbued with life could be impurities and random cracks leading to some primordial circuitry retaining and relaying energy and information. Another is actually first as an organic self-replicating molecular system eventually encrusting itself in silicates rather than lipid membranes. Many organisms on Earth are already generating crystalline structures around them and even inside themselves, to the point that most of the mass of the organism becomes inorganic. Crystalline beings would then just have taken this a step further. A third option is through silicon-based pseudo-organic chemistry, meaning that instead of using carbon to build the skeletons of complex molecules, silicon is used. Because of the chemical properties of silicon compared to carbon, this could result in more rigid structures being more amenable to incorporate inorganic materials. No matter what, we eventually would end up with a crystalline living being by natural means. And this could be conceived of to happen on planets that are dominated by minerals rather than organic chemistry, such as the diamond planet 55 Cancri E perhaps. It could maybe even have started as very simple gem pebbles that use internal magnetic fields to protect themselves and become motile in the crystal-laden landscape. Perhaps the magnetic field could evolve to capture molecules for creating a physical membrane for the gem to be embedded in. The gem pebble could then continue to manipulate materials in its environment to create copies of itself, setting natural selection in motion. These electromagnetic membranes or gembranes could start out as simple bubbles and then become more and more complex over time. Anyways, this is still highly speculative with very limited empirical or even theoretical basis, but an intriguing thought nevertheless. And maybe one day we really will find such exotic life forms living out there in the universe. In any case, thanks for watching, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss anything. Many thanks to my patrons for their continued support. For now, stay sharp and stay evolved.